When I first booted up Two Thrones, a few questions continued to circulate my mind for the 8 or so hours of gameplay. How do you finish a trilogy? Who should the prince be when the credits roll? How can you tie the bow off on tens of hours of rising tension, plot twists, and character evolution? We are now 3 games into Prince of Persia. Sands of Time told the tale of a smug royal son, our prince, who throughout romance and trauma fixed the apocalypse he wrought on another kingdom. Our experience was one of wanderlust while exploring a colourful, vividly painted castle. Warrior Within shot us forward 7 years, where our prince, a hardened warrior and a broken man, much more muscular and covered in scars and tattoos, looked to change the timeline and his own fate. Through savagery, brutality, and bloodying his hands, he bent time itself to slay the Dahaka and leave the island with Kylena, the former Empress of Time, the physical embodiment of the sands of time. A boring, poorly written character, but nevertheless someone the prince cares for. Two Thrones starts some weeks later, finally anchoring the story in the prince's home of Babylon, the bustling heart of Persia. Finishing the story off in Babylon feels perfect. The prince has rarely reflected on home throughout his journeys. We know little of his upbringing, or even if he enjoys being part of royalty. The Persia in the series has always been with a lowercase p, and that's a sign of the times. Today, a game like Assassin's Creed Origins would have spent millions of dollars on creating an authentic recreation of Egypt just prior to Roman colonization, just to impart a feeling that you're really in Caesar and Cleopatra's Egypt. Whereas, and I'm not joking here, I wouldn't be surprised if the title and lore of Prince of Persia first originated simply because of how the alliteration works, because it rolls nicely off the tongue. But we can dispel all that cynicism now, because the writers have finally taken us to Persia, Babylon, one of the titans of the ancient world. Whether the game makes good use of the emotional weight of this location remains to be seen, but this is an exciting way to start off the game. Now, to not keep you dangling throughout the duration of the video, I summarise my thoughts by saying that I think this game has some great gameplay and fantastic solutions to segments I typically don't enjoy in the franchise. I also enjoy the more upbeat tone, and I found the character scenes to be quite strong. The plotting ends up being more of a passable blockbuster, and I know that sounds like a criticism, because it is, but a 5 out of 10 story is still pretty decent for a video game. And with all this in mind, I hope you grant me some time to explain why I feel this way. Thank you to anyone who has tuned in and is still weighing up whether to commit to watching this. I know this video is much shorter than usual, but there's simply less to cover. We have a fairly simplistic story. Whereas Warrior Within was an overwhelming Pandora's box of brilliant design choices with some miserable failures, what we have here is simple and safe. It's the Force Awakens of the Star Wars universe, a few cool additions, a lot of rehashed ideas, and a painful amount of undeveloped concepts that could have been mind-blowingly impactful if taken further. You'll find timestamps in the description, and I recommend watching in chunks since your posture is important. My impression is that Two Thrones is overall not that warmly reflected on by the wider gaming community. Definitely it's a fine enough game, scoring well on Metacritic, but I've never met anyone who refers to it as the height of the trilogy. That place is always taken by Warrior Within or Sands of Time. Of course, Two Thrones doesn't have the benefit of introducing us to the series, or even introducing a radical tonal shift like Warrior Within, but there was still some innovations which I really liked, and which I want to return to people's attention. Firstly, we're going to run through the new gameplay devices and storytelling techniques Two Thrones has brought to the table. Following that, we'll walk through the story, analyze the beats and the execution of the themes. I'll preface by saying the narrative to Two Thrones is okay, it's passable, but with a bit more polish and a few small improvements, this could have been brilliant, and I mean that, which is why, to wrap all this up, I want to spend just a few minutes talking about what I found to be the core message of the game and giving my final thoughts on the game but the series as well. And I'll also put forward some mild suggestions that I think would have really elevated the story and helped make the game as memorable as the 2 preceding games to the franchise. Alright, that's enough chit chat. Let's start digging into Two Thrones. Two Thrones carries the same core ideas as the previous games. We control our hero, the Prince of Persia, who is acrobatic as hell and has some control over time. We've ditched the dark, bloodthirsty aesthetic. No more lopping off heads, nervous breakdowns, or having the prince scream in rage or fury throughout combat. The platforming is just as good as before, with a few new moves thrown in, including dagger plates, narrow gaps the prince can wedge himself into, stable chains you can sneak down, and even spring platforms. Many of these don't have continuity in the world. There's no in-universe explanation for why we have springing platforms throughout Babylon's streets. And there's plenty of random doors and pressure plates that have zero possible in-universe explanation, but for the most part they're fun, and we can overlook these. The standard combat carries over from Warrior Within, a massive improvement to the first game, where our dual-wielding prince can throw weapons and even throw his enemies off high balconies. All the good stuff that, if you're like me and play more for the platforming and story, then you're sure to appreciate it since it allows you to breeze through the combat sections. And then we have the radical changes. Stealth combat is my favourite addition to the game. It's thematically perfect for our prince, our acrobatic, light-footed prince, who is more than familiar with his handy tool, the Dagger of Time, than any other weapon, takes down enemies with quiet, lethal ease. These effectively amount to light quick-time events, where every time the dagger flashes, you're invited to press the trigger again, a small prompt for the prince to keep kicking ass in vicious glory. Not everyone loves this change, but I do. It means that if you don't want to engage with the combat, you don't have to. You can take out the tough enemies all pumped up with immense ease. And this is my hot take of the video. Even in 2020, this is still some of the best stealth mechanics I've ever seen in a game. You automatically move into stealth if no enemy can see you. And if they can see you, then you're no longer in stealth. No clunky shifting modes on your part, just perfect automation. And better yet, you move just as fast when you're stealthed. Games typically love to slow you down, a small punishment for stealth. But in committing to the prince's swift athleticism, we shuffle around just as quick, and I love it. And if you don't, that's great, you can take on the sand monsters as per usual. And oh man, if you're the Dark Prince, you can violently ring your chain around the enemy's necks, breaking bones and choking them out. Two Thrones builds upon the idea of the Sand Wraith from the previous game, a new mode to play our prince, which kicks in about every half hour. The Dark Prince. Is the name generic? Oh yeah, but is it good? Definitely. The Dark Prince amplifies everything about our usual prince. With combos that feel familiar to early God of War titles, the prince slashes and twists his chain around to strike down multiple enemies at once, enemies which our human prince would need a dozen blows to take down. But the best changes comes in the form of the parkour. Using his chain for greater leverage on the jumps and wall runs, the prince can cover twice the usual distance in some dang glorious sequences. The kicker, you slowly lose health, but ironically this makes your combat the safest moments of gameplay, where collecting sand restores your life to full. But in those long dashes as you traverse the environment, landscapes our comparatively weak human prince could never cover, that's when you're truly fearful. Whether or not you like the design is very subjective, but I do think some of the small details are impressive, like how the brilliant golden glow slowly fades as your life depletes, completely extinguishing as you die, like a collapsing pile of ash, or that when you survive on low health, your dark side teases you.
You, a warrior?
Or, alternatively, if you dispatch enemies taking no damage at all, he shrieks in laughter at the hilarity of them, taking the piss out of them.
That was fun!
Or just the fact that as the game progresses and the hero becomes more corrupted in mind, so too does the glimmering scar spread up his arm, shoulders, and across his torso. The best feature of the Dark Prince is undoubtedly his personality, his dialogue. He's quick-witted, abrasive, and enjoys the hell out of poking fun of our sulky prince. A demon locked in the prince's mind, the voice takes immense pleasure in ribbing us for our failures.
Did you really expect to find him alive? Even after everything you have experienced, still you hold out hope.
But also, he pushes the prince down a predictably darker path, to be selfish, violent, and focused on revenge as opposed to prosperity. It's a fantastic contrast in voices that we're exposed to. Boss fights are back, the best the series has to offer. While Warrior Within tried for traditional boss fights, big arenas, long health bars, Two Thrones makes a strong effort to incorporate the prince's parkour and acrobatics into the fights. And it's honestly so welcome, because this is exactly how I think the prince would approach a drawn-out long fight. Health upgrades come back in the form of drinking water from a fountain and completing a trap circuit, but these don't seem to be as well designed as those of Warrior Within. And just how boring does this fountain look? We also have a new feature, vehicles, sort of. A great deal of the story deals with our prince trying to get back into the heart of Babylon, and to traverse these distances we have breakneck chariot runs where we bash through narrow alleys and run over sand monsters, and even one where we hitch a ride on a moss golem. These are definitely gimmicky and bare bones, but also some of the more memorable parts of the game. And thank heavens our prince's monologues are back. This was one of the most glaring absences from Warrior Within, and it's what made the prince feel so vacant in personality there. We even have the original voice actor back, perfectly capturing that slightly bratty and entitled tone, but still charming with a kind cadence of the prince from our first game. Now we get our rambling hero speaking in poetic soliloquies as he reminisces on his youth, time spent prowling the streets of Babylon.
In my youth, I would often lose myself in the back alleys of the upper city. I spent hours running and tumbling, imagining myself all manner of creatures. The rooftops and passageways were secret windows onto other worlds, but now everything has changed. The color bled away.
Or even in quiet moments as he collects his thoughts and feelings and imagines how he should approach his next challenge. This, paired with the Dark Prince constantly chiding him, poking fun at his failings, or even just providing commentary but in a darker tone, is fucking phenomenal.
Is this necessary?
Yes.
You're sure?
Yes.
Fine. Waste your valuable time rescuing the princess. I can only imagine what the vizier is doing right now. Probably expanding his army, torturing innocent citizens, deciding what kingdom to conquer next. What he should be doing is dying.
It adds so much colour, and it's the perfect amount of filler dialogue to keep us company as we chase after our enemies. But we also have too many voices in Two Thrones, because we also have a narrator back. As the prince muses throughout his journey and the Dark Prince drops inflammatory comments, the addition of a third voice, a narrator, just creates a traffic jam. It's too many voices clogging up the joint, and because we already have the characters expressing themselves quite well, there's no subtext for the narrators to dig into. There's just commentary and a rehash of what we already know, repeating what we've seen. In the first game, the prince narrates from the future and provides such flavor to the story as a wise, traumatized man who stands in contrast to the boyish character we play on screen. It's the delightful dichotomy of that elevates the story in so many ways. In Two Thrones, we have Kylena, who is kind of the prince's girlfriend, who blandly states what we've already seen. Honestly, we can just compare the two.
Do you think I felt regret as I gazed upon the destruction we had wrought? Or at least humility at the speed with which a world can be transformed from a good world into a hell? If you think so, you are mistaken. For in that moment I thought of one thing only. The honor and glory I would bring my father by fighting like a warrior in my first battle.
This here is the opening narration from Sands of Time. It's insightful, ominous, and makes us eager to see what transformation there is on the journey. Here, on the other hand, is an example from Two Thrones that occurs right after the prince has a fight with Farah.
Poor prince. His secret self had been revealed, and Farah quite disturbed by what she had seen. Perhaps he should have been honest from the beginning.
It's boring, wasted audio, and she does this all the time. It's time I think that would have been better split between more monologues and banter between the two princes. A lot of effort still goes to trying to recapture the feel of Sands of Time, and you'll see some cheeky references throughout the narrative review. Small things like Kylena talking about pausing a story when you bring up the main menu.
When you have the time, I will continue.
But the game doesn't fully commit. There's no talk of, wait, that didn't happen if you walk off a cliff. So the idea isn't wholly adopted. The developers try to take us through a more diverse set of environments again, similar to the first game, but I think they kind of failed here. While I appreciate that the environments aren't as monotone and darkly lit as Warrior Within, most of what you deal with here are just Babylon's rooftops and alleyways. I mean, I guess, what did I expect, right? Of course that's how our roguish, fast-paced prince would navigate the city, but I really just miss the variety we had in Sands of Time. Zoos to colossal defense mechanisms, sewers to astrology towers. But on the other hand, I am trying to recapture the magic of the first game, and that probably shouldn't be done again. Lastly, and following in hot pursuit of Warrior Within, you'll come across a fair few bugs. Here are just a sample of what I saw.
How did you come to possess that?
It's this.
I have seen the way you hunger for combat.
Altogether, I think the best criticism that can be lodged against Two Thrones is that it doesn't take many risks. In either the gameplay it introduces or the story it tries to weave, it plays everything safe. In the narrative review, you're going to see that many plot beats are lifted directly from Sands of Time, and that's a shame, because those are moments that the original game executed far better, while here they don't have the right ingredients, the ideal character arcs, to hit those same high notes, so some of what we're left with feels flat and forgettable. Which is a funny sentiment to juggle, because I do think Two Thrones is better than the usual rap it gets online, and it's good precisely because of what makes it unique, elements like the Dark Prince, or having a string of lieutenants to hunt down. The only shame is that, as you will soon see, so many of these concepts could have been pushed even further to really make this game the highlight of the trilogy, but what we're left with is a lukewarm conclusion to a beloved franchise. We start our journey where most great journeys begin. On the sex yacht, the prince has spent the last few weeks getting it on with Kylena, the Empress of Time. Alright, let's back up a second. So continuing on from the end of Warrior Within, the prince managed to slay the Dahaka, the immortal guardian which hunted him across the world, and in doing so he saved Kylena, and because her physicality is the Sands of Time, he ensured the Sands of Time have never been created. The events of the first game never occurred, and it's with a sense of relief he sails back to Babylon, his home. Moving forward, we're tasked with treating what happens next as a standalone story, but also the conclusion to an epic series of events, one you might have spent tens of hours invested in. Reflecting on his quest so far, the prince drops Farah's amulet into the river Euphrates. The amulet was his guarding vessel in the previous game, a talisman which allowed him to survive unscathed the horrors of the Island of Time. It seems a little disrespectful to Farah to release it now, but we have to remember that he's trying to move on, do the right thing. He's returning home after years of absence with a strange, mystical woman, so in his mind, it's probably time to stop living in the past, mature the hell up and be a man. Rounding the corner, Kylena expresses some vague anxieties about the timeline, and the prince attempts to calm her, that she'll find peace and comfort soon, and we are greeted with a beautiful but terrifying shot. Babylon, the center of the ancient world, burning to the ground. Ah well. It was a nice sentiment. Their ship is struck by a trebuchet, which is amazingly advanced engineering for 1000 BC, but anyway, the prince and Kylena are separated in the wreckage and we get a panning shot of a warring, wounded city. It lingers, and we know not only does the prince face his hardest quest yet, but this time, it's personal. Rising from a shipwrecked slumber, the prince sees her carried off by some ominous thugs. Naturally, he's not happy about this. So yeah, right off the bat we have a concrete driving quest, a short-term character chase. The sun is setting over the harbour. The battlements are flush with battle, but the prince can't linger. He's got a hot girl to save, for like the 4th time now. As per usual, the battlements act as our tutorial, and honestly I think this is probably the least visually interesting tutorial location of the entire series. It's just, yeah, barracks and back alleys and sheds. Cool, but very uninspired. The prince eventually picks up a small butter knife he can use for self-defense, and we immediately know our smart-assed, whiny but charming hero is back.
Why is it that every time disaster strikes, I find myself without a proper blade? Still, it's better than nothing.
I like this quip, poking fun of when he started out last game with a piece of driftwood, and when he chased after Farah after she stole his weapons at the close of the first game. A few drips of characterization fall into place here, The prince, in a furious frenzy to save Kylena, dashes overhead while citizens of the city are brutalized by some of the enemy forces, but there's nothing he can do for them now, so he marches on. Kylena points out that he's motivated purely by selfishness here, that he's only interested in not proving himself a liar.
You should know that it was not love that drove him, but duty. I was his responsibility. He had made a promise that was now broken and undone. As with all mistakes he had made, the prince meant to fix this.
And that's a pretty shitty quality, right? Trying to save a life for your own ego. But knowing who our prince has been, it makes sense for him to fall into this old trap of focusing more on revenge and pride than what will actually do the most good for the greatest number of people. So for the introduction of the game, we play cat and mouse, catching glimpses of Kylena being dragged away as we are just conveniently out of reach. And this gimmick even continues into the palace. The palace, everyone. The prince's home, right? Right? Surely the prince lives in a palace? Well, we can't really say for sure, since here, of all places, the royal palace of the kingdom his family rules over, the palace is probably the one environment in the entire game where we don't get one of the prince's rolling monologues. No reflections on growing up here, roaming these halls, attending court and watching dreamily as his father adjudicated, as he one day would too. Surely, looking up at his father's very throne, surely this would trigger some kind of dialogue. But no, I tried to walk everywhere in the room trying to trigger some dialogue, but nothing ever came. Nope, just more dagger plates and climbing around these marble rooms. How fun. Upon reaching the throne room, we hear a grand evil monologue.
Many years ago, I journeyed with the Maharaja of India to the island of Time, intending to claim its secrets. What we discovered was a barren, ruined place, its halls deserted, and its guardians gone to sand. Strange tales adorned its walls, which spoke of an empress of time. But of this enigmatic creature, there was no trace. We returned to India with treasure nonetheless. A staff, a dagger, an empty hourglass covered in jewels, and books. Such secrets they contained. For even then I was an older man, and knew that my time would soon be at an end. The books showed me that life eternal was not beyond my reach, but it required the essence of the Empress herself, the power of the sands. But you were gone. They were gone. Or so I thought. I turned my attention towards other pursuits, and left that dream behind. But then, 4 weeks ago, the dagger stirred and showed me things, whispered to me in my sleep. It drew me here, towards Babylon. Alas, the Maharaja did not share my vision, would not grant me leave. So I slew him and claimed his kingdom, his army for my own. Nothing would stand between me and my desire.
Honestly, it's fantastic. While we haven't seen who our true foe is yet, from the dialogue and narrative weave, we immediately know. The Vizier. He's back. The return of the Vizier. I know it's not that compelling, but his explanation for why he's come to Babylon is actually really cool. So, once again, the prince has messed up everything. In Warrior Within, we learnt the Maharaja visited the Island of Time, which is where he stole the hourglass. But in this universe, there is no hourglass. The Vizier, in his mad lust for power, chose to murder Farah's father, the Maharaja, and visit the Island of Time himself. He found useless relics, artifacts that are empty vessels without the sands of time. But upon hearing rumors of a prince carting the Empress of Time back to Babylon, he has chosen to preemptively strike. Are there openings we can criticize here? Definitely, but I really like this premise. For the second time, we see the princes meddling with time, trying to squirm out of the consequences of a previous game, come back to haunt him, and to have it be the Vizier, the villain he stopped in the first game, but unintentionally resurrected through his actions in the second. You gotta admit, it's pretty cool the way this ties together. And in another glossy cinematic, we see the prince make his mad rush to save Kylena.
This is how I died.
No!
and get absolutely demolished. Pinned to the wall by the Vizier's lieutenants, we're given an immediate snapshot of who the antagonists are, like something out of a comic book spread. A female ninja up front, a hulking brute behind, and in the background a pair of hardened warriors donning battle armor. This is pretty good storytelling for a video game. Honestly, the effect of being drip-fed who our threats are, hinting at future boss fights, and yeah, I know this isn't rocket science, but it's good.
At last. Too late, I'm afraid. I believe I have something of yours.
No!
And the Vizier achieves his plan. Like shit, his whole mission from Sands of Time, where the rug was pulled out from under him at the last second, actually works here. He's done it. His evil ploy was a success, and now the Sands of Time are again released upon the world, and he is immortal. He's gone full Jafar from Aladdin. But seriously, this is a worst case scenario, the lowest possible point our prince could start from. His age-old enemy seems unstoppable, the Sands of Time are set to infect a city, his very home, and he's now got this painful-looking piece of shrapnel wire embedded in his flesh. He himself seems to be afflicted by the Sands of Time. And oh yeah, his girlfriend was murdered. Which, like, I don't care about, she was never interesting, but naturally he's upset. The only upside to any of this, the only redeeming moment for the prince, is snatching back the Dagger of Time. And now it's our main weapon. For the first time, we don't main hand a longsword, but instead wield the Dagger of Time. If we want a sword or mace or scimitar, that goes to our offhand, and this is the perfect mix-up. Not only does it fit the prince's roguish playstyle going forward, but the Dagger of Time is his icon, a tool the prince is more familiar with than any other. So what do you do at your lowest, having lost everything, having caused the apocalypse for the second time now, your kingdom aflame and in ruins? You just keep going. The prince travels through the ruined palace, shell-shocked and collecting himself. Marble white walls and ornate decorations flash by as you fling monsters into chasms that have rent through the floor. Eventually, the horribly inflamed wound on the prince's arm flares and we collapse into the sewers.
My arm! What's happening? What has the Vizier done to me? I don't... Oh!
Wake up, Prince.
And he's already shirtless. Alright. Much like the Vizier becoming immortal, having the prince being stripped down is strikingly fitting, as silly as it sounds. All the final plot beats of Sands of Time have kicked in now, at the start of the second act. In many ways, the game takes us to the final stages of the first story, and pushes on, asking, what if the story never ended, but merely continued?
The way behind you is gone, so you will have to find another exit from these sewers. Be quick about it. Start moving.
What?
But here is where we get Two Thrones' first flash of originality, a voice heard only to the prince that prompts him onward, that explains with lethal coldness the reality of his situation, that gives him hints against the new enemies he faces, and we continue traversing the sewer until... After years of interacting with the Sands of Time, the prince has become infected, a sand monster. And the scene here is designed well. We don't have time to mourn, to get bogged down, because as our health depletes, we're also being swarmed by the monsters from before, in greater numbers, so all the prince can do is rattle off questions while his darker ego has all the opportunity to laugh and explain, to sell him on what he's become. Their banter is great, we'll see this throughout the game, but the prince is so rattled at what he's become for so many reasons, even just because he's hideous.
I assume this is not permanent?
It is, if you want it to be.
I do not.
But you will.
Meanwhile, the Dark Prince gently prompts him to accept this as a blessing, a welcome evolution. I also enjoy that it's never wholly explained why the prince is infected. because his dark side explains there's heaps of potential reasons. He's abused the dagger for hours on end. He spent days on the Island of Time. He was intimate with the Empress of Time for several weeks. Like, Christ, it could be any one or all of those at once. My headcanon was always that since he threw away the Medallion of Time, those brief moments where the Vizier released the sands but the prince had not yet claimed the dagger to protect himself, it was in those seconds of vulnerability that caused his sickness. And I know I droned on about it before, but the gameplay in this form is just so fun, amplifying everything in the prince's arsenal. But there's also a guilty pleasure in enjoying it. The prince's mind is split. Desires, morality, and a sense of justice, it's all tearing apart. We know we can't trust this smart voice that lectures down to him, that it's hurting our hero, but we still enjoy the gameplay. And again, it's fantastic because we're reliant on the voice. The prince can't succeed without him. The voice is useful. He's on our side in the quest against the Vizier, and as he goes on to keep proving his worth and usefulness, we trust him more and more because he continues to save us. Much like had we not met Farah in the first game, we know we would be doomed without our darker ego. And we see it in the next scene. We spy the Vizier turn up and, Christ, how do I turn down the brightness? No, seriously, I could never get the Vizier to not burn out my pupils here. But maybe that's for the best, because very politely, seeing this old Indian man turned into this pale, hairless, stark white, floating golden butterfly might be the least intimidating villain design I have ever seen, ever. In short, what we learn here is to turn off these glowy portals, since the Vizier can teleport through these. It never becomes a plot point moving forward, like we never travel through one of them, we're just incentivized to take out the enemies quickly so reinforcements aren't summoned. The Dark Prince urges us on to eliminate these enemies.
Are you sure you can control this thing?
And as we transition into the chariot segment, he prompts us on, congratulates us, and insists that we hasten to complete our quest. In a very brief flash, we run over some monsters and we see a young woman crawl out of a crate. In my opinion, the ending to the first chariot segment is indicative of the game as a whole. Against the beautiful backdrop of the Tower of Babel and the inner Babylon streets drawing closer, we get some over-the-top action nonsense that you would expect from a Call of Duty game, all with the subtle undermining joke on the last beat. It's fine, it's a game and it's meant to have spectacle and be fun, but it's also Hollywood trash. In a series where the first game spent a 3-minute long conversation in the dark, where the prince and Farah shared their vulnerabilities, compared to what we have here, it's just not what made me fall in love with the series, and it shows me how far from grace it has fallen. While narrating, Kylena emphasizes that our prince is ignorant to the plights of the citizens, but I think we could have shown that more in-game, which is so ridiculous because the game shows perfect organic storytelling 10 seconds later. I love this, their conflict, their opposition, but most importantly, when the Dark Prince says this.
I'm impressed.
Oh, good. Your opinion means a great deal to me.
Is that how you thank the man who just saved your life?
First, you did not save my life. I did. Second, you are not a man. Just a disembodied voice. A ghost. And third, I never asked for your help, and I certainly do not need it.
While I admire your bravado, you would be wise to show some respect.
And you would be wise to keep quiet.
Show me some respect, he demands. It's not lighthearted and playful like most of his comments, it's sincere and threatening. It startles you and makes you wonder what he can do and what he will do if the prince continues to defy him. He's warning the prince not to fully trust him here, and the chilling effect of it sits with you until the very last moments of the story. The prince sees more explicit examples of the sand monsters brutalizing the citizens.
Don't take me there! Anywhere but that place!
Something is happening down there.
And while he's racked with anger and a desire to help, small chidings by the Dark Prince are enough to push him on after the Vizier, to ignore his people. It's sad to watch, but also right on character. Additionally, we have two main story beats here as we prowl the rifttops. We see the prince optimistically wonder where his father is, and further, we see the prince saved by a mysterious flurry of arrows. We come across the first of the Vizier's lieutenants, the hulking brute, now empowered into a towering titan by the sands. And missing his jaw? It's really gross. But we can also put things together now. That citizens were being dragged off and imprisoned here. They were likely being executed or even fed to the brute. It's an unsettling thought, which makes it all the better when we begin to tear him apart. The fight is a cakewalk, no doubt about it. You do 2 sets of acrobatic circuits to climb into the arena and gouge out his eyes before slowly hacking away at his feet and completely ripping him apart. It works fine as an introduction to the boss fight mechanics, and if nothing else, it's quick and clean. So the prince has inadvertently saved the people of Babylon here. Inadvertently, because remember, he was happy to leave them to die, to run off after the vizier. So because of that, it feels very off to us, the audience, that the prince gets all the kudos for helping them when he was so blasé about leaving them to perish, that he just happened to stumble in this arena. But remember, that's also the point of the story here. Yeah, the prince is being a fuckwit, and he's riding a fine line now between neglecting his duty and getting lucky, and that's sure to come to bite him later. Filled with shame and revenge, the prince continues on. Again, saved by a flurry of arrows, we realize the person watching us was the woman we saved from the crate, Farah.
How do you know my name?
Yes, I
eagerly await your response.
have heard tales, wondrous tales of a beautiful and brave princess of India. One who has traveled to Babylon seeking to punish an evil vizier who has caused her great distress.
See? Now she's going to kill us.
Farah, who no longer remembers the prince because, as the voice explains, she never met us. All those experiences are lost to time, like tears in the rain, only now existing in the memory of our horny, troubled prince, and the prince wastes no effort catching up to her. So we have them strike a truce. As they converse and interact throughout the level, it's hard not to focus on what's changed between them. Farah seems impressed that our prince is the son of Shahraman, yet ironically it was Shahraman in the first game who led the Persian armies to invade India. Moreover, her whole persona is more confident. She's battle-worn, snappy and capable, much more so than in the first game. Those 7 years and a new timeline have meant immense suffering to her, and she doesn't know it, but that's our prince's fault. Everything here is emotionally loaded and I love it. We catch sight of the vizier entering the temple, and Farah chastises the prince for wanting to leap into violence. Again, the prince shows himself to be charming, empathetic, and solution-oriented, and this dialogue between them is so enjoyable, better than anything we got in Warrior Within, and it's all perfectly complemented by the Dark Prince's snarkiness.
Oh, how silly of me. You're right. Perhaps we should surrender, or turn away and leave the city. I know a lovely little island just a few weeks' journey from here. I'm sure by the time we return, this will all be sorted out.
If it comforts you to mock me, then by all means continue. But you are so focused on killing him, you've thrown strategy completely out the window. You could have died.
I suppose. But now we need to find a way to enter the temple. We're wasting time here.
But the effect we have is different to Sands of Time, for a few reasons. We never felt the crushing isolation of Babylon like we did in Azad, where the prince was, for a while, seemingly the only person left alive in the world. The terror and loneliness that set in only dispelled when we met Farah, our comrade and eventual romance. Here, the whole context is a little weaker. Because of the Dark Prince, and because we spent the first 30 minutes of the game cutting down humans, we never felt completely alien, as though we were trespassing, the last remnant of humanity. Meeting Farah is simply a nice twist. But on top of that, the longer you play, the quicker you realize you never actually journey alongside her. She never joins you in combat, she doesn't walk and leap around beside you. There's always a contrived reason for the two of you to be separated by a balcony or wall, always in shouting distance, but still always apart. And I do get it. The level design is more complicated now. The combat is interspersed between different sections, so the job of coding Farah in Two Thrones is a much higher burden than earlier. But the effect is noticeable. Now she's not a friend we persevere through trauma with, she's just a character we chat to in cutscenes. The relationship here is not as awful as Kylena in the previous game, but here it is still a step down from the character authenticity of Sands of Time. So we journey through the temple. It's never wholly explained, but my understanding is that this is some form of barracks, because the prince seems to expect to find the city's best fighters here. He hints at why he's confident he can slay the vizier.
How do you plan to kill the vizier? He's immortal now.
The dagger made him into what he is. It can unmake him.
I suppose we will know the truth of this soon enough.
And that's fine. I can accept that the dagger is a solution to the Vizier's immortality. We spend a while moving levers so that Farah can progress. It's a nice callback to the first game, but again, a little hollow since we never actually get to walk beside her. We do get clever, naturally flowing dialogue that raises Farah's suspicion at the prince's behavior.
Do you think you could move a little faster?
You're more than welcome to come down here and try it yourself. 7 years and still nothing's changed.
7 years? What are you talking about?
It's a figure of speech.
There is something very odd about you.
She has no idea.
It's all so refreshing and needed after an entire game with the prince not having any wholesome relationships. Deeper into the temple, we see the vizier cut down the soldiers, just like snaps them right in half with his crab claws. Here, the prince laments the soldiers' deaths, and Kylena even outright says the city has fallen.
Babylon had finally fallen, and none were left to come to the prince's aid. He was now the city's only hope.
But it doesn't feel like Babylon has fallen. But okay, let's run with it and say the city has fallen and now it's all up to the prince. Shouldn't this be a moment of high drama, emphasizing how fucked the prince is? The vizier is immortal and the garrison, the strongest unit of the city, has been defeated. We should feel the rage and the pessimism of this moment. But it's just more platforming with voiceovers. You blink and you miss it, because Kylena wants you to believe this is the lowest moment of the series. This here would have been a great point for the prince to watch his father murdered, watch from afar while he's struck down, and then try his best to take on the vizier and be flung away like an insect. Christ, this should have been a cinematic. But sadly, they just missed the mark here. I don't feel any emotional intensity at all. We reunite with Farah, and as they re-strategize, there's a subtle tender moment, his hand on hers. Again, we need to move obstacles around so Farah can journey with us, and the marketplace aesthetic is nothing we haven't seen before, so the gameplay isn't too hot here. But there are nice moments meshed in, with the prince and Farah, a natural course to their relationship, strengthening while the Dark Prince interjects with some silly banter and becomes further exasperated with the prince's affection for Farah.
Thank you, Prince.
Of course. The problem is, now I am trapped.
Just like a woman. Solving her problem creates a new one for you.
Allow me to return the favor, then.
It's all really cute and nicely done. The first point of real tension comes to a head here. Up till now, the Dark Voice has twisted the prince to only have his mind put to revenge, to ignore the real plight of the panicked citizens, and it's been working. And naturally we find ourselves at a crossroads, where the empathetic Farah wants to detour to save the unfortunate, while the prince wants to move on, rush on ahead. It's great, because he's really scummy and he even tries to gaslight her, but he pulls himself back at the last second.
Something could happen to her. I cannot lose her again.
No! You're so close!
We begin running through the brothel. It's not as compelling as the baths from the first game, but it's still a fun shift in tone and color palette. And it's here we realize something else. The primary tension of the game continues to be the prince's lust for revenge overshadowing the need to commit to his duty. But here, a secondary tension arrives. The prince doesn't want Farah to see him while transformed into a sand monster. We get some great discussions here, with the Dark Prince chiding our hero for becoming soft, shaking off his warrior spirit from the first game, and that he needs to accept that bloodthirsty, selfish person for who he truly is.
I really expected quite a bit more from you. On the Island of Time, you were so focused, so dedicated.
So selfish.
Nonsense. You were simply trying to protect what was yours. Where's the harm in that?
Look around. All of this destruction is my doing.
But we do find Farah, and just as we're finding the right words to apologize with,
I have thought about what you said, and you are right.
Can't you see we're in the middle of a conversation?
Yes, we do get a bit of a cringy Hollywood one-liner from Farah, but the action's coming so fast that we can't dwell on it. We have our new boss fight. What I really like, and we'll see this repeated throughout the game, is that while we do have some fake tensions with Farah and the prince, some contrived, forced periods where they won't get along for a segment or two, it always resolves quickly. We never have long periods of Farah despising us, no lengthy periods where we wish the prince could have just expressed himself better. Undoubtedly, there's some forced beef between them, but it always dissipates quickly and I'm grateful for that. So our second boss fight is against the lieutenant who embedded the chain in the prince's arm. Unfortunately, that's never really addressed, which is a shame because that should make this all a little bit more personal. She scored probably the most serious wound on the prince in the entire series. But hang on, she never speaks at all. In fact, there's no dialogue, there's no music, and when we shift to the second segment where we chase her around the arena, she never turns to fight. Like, she throws some shurikens at us, but just look at this, they never bloody hit. Just what's going on with this fight?
If I had some sands for every time someone said that to me. Oh, I do.
We eventually kick her off a cliff, we have another superhero one-liner, and we move on. While at least the first boss fight succeeded in showing the prince to be a selfish twat who accidentally saved his subjects, here we have nothing? Oh yeah, and Farah sees us, and yeah, she gets pretty mad. The prince, of course, falls into melancholy.
You did lie to her?
No, I simply...
Yes?
But she would not understand. What was I thinking?
It's so beautiful. It's the kind of self-focused whinging that made me enjoy the first game so much. We get some great acrobatics and the game does a good job of just letting everything breathe for a while. We've had an explosive few minutes of tension, drama and self-pity, so to spend 20 minutes focused on great set pieces of action and silence does a perfect job communicating that the prince is brooding, lost in thought, trying his best to imagine how he can talk himself out of this one. And he soon gets his chance. He catches Farah again and tries to explain himself. So yeah, she essentially gives him the middle finger, and rightly so. His reasoning is still flawed. He only cleared a path through the brothel to save her, to come after her. He's not being a good person, he's not being compassionate, he's just horny. We also get some nice commentary. We should have way more of this, but it's cute to see the prince reflect on his childhood in Babylon as we prowl the upper city.
In my youth, I would often lose myself in the back alleys of the upper city. I spent hours running and tumbling, imagining myself all manner of creatures. The rooftops and passageways were secret windows onto other worlds, but now everything has changed. The color bled away.
Since it injects these vacant pixels and plain balconies with a life and sense of realism that otherwise wouldn't be there. The best scenery of the game till now arrives as we enter the luxurious verdant gardens of the city's upmarket districts, the ritzy streets with great urban planning, and we clamber above while the prince and his dark ego's conversation loiters to more philosophical topics.
Tell me then, what do you believe it is to be a warrior?
It is hunger for combat, to seek solution with the sword. Do you disagree?
Had you asked me when we first met, I would have said the same. Now, I'm not so sure.
Think on it then.
It's a powerful segment because without Farah around to pull the prince into line, we're scared that the Dark Prince's influence will take an even stronger hold, that as his glowing scars now spread down his back, the rot and corruption has sown only deeper. We get another transport scene in the form of a moss golem we hitch a ride on. Of course, it's silly, but it's a stylish and memorable way to blitz through the canals, taking us at a breakneck pace even closer towards the Vizier, our revenge. Our next moral quandary comes when the prince is alone, with no Farah to yank him into the right direction. So what we see is a real test of his character. A building burns in the distance, we hear the screams, and the prince is moved. There's no Farah to save, but he still considers putting his vengeance to halt, and the Dark Prince is quick to point out the foolishness of this, that the Vizier is onto him. We reach the warehouse and, of course, it's a trap, and one of the lieutenants takes great pleasure in telling us. Yet still, the prince is eager to do the right thing. The puzzle is rather simple. Slide the statue of Shahraman down a conveyor. The camera is wonky and sucks a lot, so it's hard to tell if you're doing the right thing, but trial and error gets you through in a matter of minutes. But I like the imagery of what's going on here. Beat down, lost and conflicted, the prince finds solace in his father, comfort that he's been looked after, vindicated that he's making the right choice. It's cute because it also makes our prince miss Shahramar, the king, his father he hasn't seen in years, and we're excited for their eventual reunion. Another glossy cinematic and we see the workers freed. The old man from the desert tent who foretold the prince's doom last game randomly appears to welcome him, hype him up to the citizens. Sure, it's corny, and we never had a sense these two were friends, but there aren't many recurring characters in this franchise, so it's nice to have a familiar face. But we have no time to lose. We have one final batch of lieutenants to hunt down. We have our last chariot segment, and again, cool visuals. It's pretty mindless, just reflex steering and not crashing the bloody thing, but it got me thinking. Again, I appreciate it's too hard to code Farah to walk beside us in these more complicated modern games, but a brilliant workaround would have been having these chariot segments with her. Imagine if we had her sitting in the back, firing arrows, shouting at us to drive properly and stop grinding the walls, and the prince snapping back at her to pipe down. It would have been frantic fun and great rapport building between them. It's wishful thinking, but just a thought I had as we hunted down this goon because there's not much else to think about. This boss fight is the hardest one in the game, no question. I was stuck here for weeks as a kid, and from what I've read online, so were many other people. It's a more traditional fight, no opportunities for acrobatics or trickery, just you and two dudes who pummel you down. It's hard for a few reasons. There's no opportunity to collect sand, and because I finished the chariot race bone dry, I had no available sand powers for this fight, when this is definitely the fight you would want them. It acts as an elementary and more bare-bones version of the Ornstein and Smile fight from Dark Souls. One fast, zippy dude and one thick boy who with slow, heavy hits comes after you. Essentially, you attack the sword-wielding lieutenant until his guard breaks, at which point the axe guy goes for a lunging attack and is exposed for a few seconds. And that's kind of it. There's no workarounds, no trickery, that's the only way you're allowed to fight. So yeah, it's repetitive, but the quick time dagger events end up saving a lot of time and look pretty cool. You safely take down one and then, well, canonically, I guess you lose. The prince collapses exhausted. But wait, don't forget this is a no-stakes Hollywood drama. Arrows take down the final lieutenant who would have otherwise murdered you. Farah has come back, maybe even forgiven us. And because the story doesn't dwell on a subplot of her feeling betrayed for half the game, I'm willing to overlook how campy all this feels. In the most frenetic, high-budget cinematic of the game, we see Farah and the prince dash through Babylon at dusk, only to strike disaster. So yes, what happens here is very campy, and this is one we can't brush over.
Run!
Firstly, it fails as a satisfying plot beat. The prince has only just begun to set himself straight, start making the correct choices, begin looking out for his subjects as opposed to mindlessly hunting down the vizier. To be rewarded now, after all he's done was save one building in an entire city, whereas Farah has been doing that all along, feels very undeserved. The people love him, and they shouldn't, but yet the game sells this as a moment of triumph. Ultimately, we needed this scene to come later in the story, or for the prince to have corrected himself much earlier. Overall, it's simply too soon for this celebration. It also reeks of Hollywood franchise plotting. To have the poor, abused workers of the city rise up and become inspired because one selfish royal prick did one right thing after a dozen mistakes leaves a poor taste in my mouth. It's not cute or warm, it makes me feel sorry for these peasants who don't appreciate the prince has already ignored hundreds of them as they were butchered in the streets. And when the old man urges Farah and the prince on, admitting they can't fight the monsters, what we essentially have is the prince leaving them to be slaughtered over the next few hours in a fight the citizens cannot win. I know it's meant to be inspiring and the people rising up and showcasing their own agency, but yeah, in my opinion, it doesn't land well. But aside from that, can we just say that holy shit, this is beautiful. Farah's design, the horrific detail of the sand monsters, and best yet, the CG representation of the dagger collecting the sands of time as the prince cut down some of the sand monsters, an animation we see 1,000 times per game, but here, for the first time we see it gorgeously animated and it's beautiful. You can see so much labor and love went into producing this animation. And, now bolstered with the hopes and dreams of Babylon, Farah and the prince run on to confront the vizier. I'm a sucker for what comes next. We have the prince and Farah roaming the prestigious buildings of Babylon again, so awfully nostalgic of their nights spent in Azad, and coming across an elevator, certainly magnificent and impossible for the ancient world, we get some pretty on the nose Easter eggs.
Is there not a similar device in Azad? I do hope to visit Azad someday.
As the prince scampers around the ruined apartment, the two address their recent conflict, the betrayal Farah felt and the prince's brash actions.
I'm sorry.
What?
I said I'm sorry. I never apologized for the way I acted, for the things I said, for who I was.
I owe you an apology as well. It was unfair of me to accuse you of such terrible things.
But I have done terrible things.
We all make mistakes, Prince. The difference is that you have accepted yours. I saw what you did at the workshop. And what the old man said is true. You are a prince.
You're killing me.
And it's a good apology. It's to the point, there's no wasted time on melodrama. Farah waves away his anxieties, and we even have a little dig from the dark ego. I'm left very satisfied with it. After resetting the mechanism and beating on a few sand monsters, we come across my favourite scene of the game.
What is your favorite color?
Color?
Shall I repeat the question?
Blue.
Blue? That's not my favorite color.
What is the point of this?
Must every conversation we have be so serious? I know so little about you.
Very well. Then, what is your favorite food?
The pomegranate, of course.
I do not like pomegranates.
What is wrong with you?
They are messy, impossible to eat with dignity. So much work for a few seeds.
But is it not the effort that makes them that much sweeter?
I think I'm going to be sick.
Now, I've seen so many people quick to jump on and rip into this scene that it's weak flirting and awkwardly written, and I just don't see it that way. Naturally, what we see here is awkward and silly. The prince loves a woman who no longer exists, and he knew her so well, whereas Farah is still trying to figure out who the prince is. But everything they talk about is cute. Her sincerity, his stone serious exasperation. Fucking sue me, man, but I love it. And then we arrive in the Hanging Gardens, a location we simply had to visit, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and a structure that connotes all the grandeur, majesty, and mysticism of ancient Babylon. And it's kind of boring? I'm not sure what's happened here. The series has done beautiful gardens before, a few hours ago in the canals, and again in Warrior Within, and both of those are more vivid, inspired, and simply engaging than what we have here. The only other utility to this sequence is in terms of narrative, where the prince builds up our expectations for reuniting with Shahraman.
What is he like? Your father?
He is a good man. No, a great man. Strong, loyal, kind, forgiving.
What is it?
That is to say, we did not part on the best of terms.
So the gardens just amount to this. We do some parkour for a while against some walls that move, and then a very slow burner puzzle of just raising all the platforms while being mindful not to block each other. And yeah, it's fine. and then we have this hot mess.
Do not take another step. I am impressed you made it past my little welcoming party. Impressed, but also quite annoyed. You have robbed me of my strongest allies. It would be unfair of me not to return the favor. Farah will make an excellent queen, fit for a god. Although we will need to make some modifications.
Let her go!
Okay, so firstly, do I even need to explain how random this is? We haven't seen the Vizier for hours, and out of nowhere a golden butterfly fucking just appears, kidnaps the girl, and disappears. Oh no! I explained earlier that I think we should have had an earlier confrontation with the Vizier, and yes, that times a fucking 1,000, because you have to realize in context, this is the first time the Vizier has seen us since he murdered Kylina and became immortal. But he's just ignoring us, and the fact that we have the Dagger of Time, he doesn't care. He's just way too committed to role-playing Jafar and kidnapping the cute Indian love interest. Alright dude. I could trash on how these narrative peaks are being mismanaged for a while, but I do adore what comes next, because, it is exactly what you want in this game. We're struck down a ditch, metaphorically and physically at our lowest point in the game, and sure, we did do this in Sands of Time, but it's a trope I'll defend to the death, because to be beaten down beyond repair and to dust yourself off, climb up, persevere and kick ass once more, it's a guaranteed hit. We're programmed to love it, and we do, because we're chimps with rocks for brains, and this all works for me. What succeeds here is twofold. Yes, the prince is beaten down but determined to succeed. There's a tick from me. But additionally, we're scared because the secondary conflict of the story bubbles back into play. The Dark Prince. He says it himself. There's no water down here. We can't turn back into a human. We're trapped not only down a well, but as a sand monster. I think this would have been hit out of the park if we had another scene a few chapters earlier, where the prince expresses fright of this exact scenario happening because he just escaped in a close call where he only just wrestled back control from the Dark Prince. But I still give it a solid B+ because I'm on the edge of my seat. The darker ego is winning the fight for the prince's soul. And the cream on top, this here contains the best acrobatic sequences of the entire game. The cylindrical level design meshes perfectly with our amplified running and chain swinging. The dialogue that bounces between them is short, punchy, and each one of the Dark Ego's jabs hits home. Our vulnerable prince can't stand up to this quality of shit talking.
Do you see it? Feel its moist embrace? Why, I think it's gone. I think the Vizier has drained it. How long do you think you can maintain your health, your control of the body?
And after weathering all this anxiety and abuse, we come to the lowest blow yet. We find Shahraman, the prince's father.
Oh, come on now. Did you really expect to find him alive? Even after everything you have experienced, still you hold out hope.
Oh, Father. What have I done?
What now, then? Gather up enough sand, perform another grand rewind? Or perhaps you can return to the island and travel back to a time when he might still be saved. Maybe rescue a damsel in distress along the way.
No! You are right. I have been like a child. Naive and arrogant. Always rushing to undo my mistakes. Never facing the consequences of my actions. No more. I accept what I have done, and all that it implies.
What is this? You have no water? How did you...
You hold no power over me now. Begone. Retreat to whatever dark hole spawned you, and do not trouble me again.
There's little to say of this cutscene that isn't immediately clear. Our prince, suffering defeat after defeat, accepts after 3 games that not every fate can be fought, not every injustice reversed, and through his burning shame, rage and self-loathing, he collects himself, stands up straight, and puts a bottle on that demon within. It's corny, it's Hollywood, it makes no sense that Shahraman is here alone and dead, it's cliche and contrived, and still, I love it. It's the monkey brain kicking in again. It doesn't matter we have unanswered questions or that seeing our father murdered in the temple would have been a far better narrative solution, because we have a new glowing sword, Shahraman's own weapon. It one-hits enemies and the music kicks in, and for the first time in some hours, we feel pride again in the prince as our protagonist. We navigate out of the tomb, the incandescent glitter of the sword guiding our path, and we climb out of the darkness into the light. There's a single goal left: eliminate the vizier, save Farah, and claim our crown. So we climb, and we climb until we find our fight. And yeah, there's probably an hour of acrobatics left between us finding our father and returning to face the vizier, and it's all parkouring up the Tower of Babel. So you see different environments, and the last stretch even harkens back to our final climb in the Sands of Time, up the Tower of Dawn. And in that game it was so powerful, for all the reasons I spoke about in that video, but mostly because with the backdrop of the rising sun and the dead silence, we only had our regrets and prayers to keep us company. We were still fighting to be redeemed at that point in the story, to set things right, to find our conviction. But here, in Two Thrones, we just found our conviction in the pit when we found our father. The prince's character arc concluded there. The battle for the prince's soul is over, done, and everything afterwards is just filler. Decent filler, fun filler, but with the prince not voicing a single monologue in the time we have left, there's nothing left to do but push on. We just climb the outskirt of another tower, overlook a rather banal scene of midday Babylon, and aren't left with anything to ponder. It's fine enough, but it hardly leaves one inspired. We ascend the elevator and find the vizier toying with Farah, truly the most complex of villain arcs. And what follows is an exact opposite experience to our final boss fight in Sands of Time. In the first game of the trilogy, the redeeming feature of the lackluster final fight was the powerful dialogue between the characters present. Now we have a fine enough boss fight, boring by modern standards but decent for its time, taking place on the backdrop of some of the most uninspired dialogue between our hero and villain. Like right here.
You will pay for what you have done to my people.
Dancer, things will be better now. You should thank me.
They live among mindless monsters in service to your madness.
It is the price of progress.
The vizier justifies the creation of the sand zombies by saying this was a sacrifice for progress. What? Come on, there's like 3 minutes left in the entire franchise. Don't make the vizier some radical idealist. He's evil and wants to be immortal. That works totally fine for a villain in this sort of game. We get 3 phases. One of the standard combat sequences against him where we block his crab claws and hack away at him. Next, rubble starts violently careening around the arena, which we need to weave through in order to quite literally start tearing him apart, shredding through his golden exoskeleton like peeling wings from a gilded moth. It feels great, and we top it off by impaling Shahraman's sword through his chest, and we really hurt him. The last run of the game, the franchise, is to scamper up and maneuver through a labyrinth of rubble the vizier has kindly levitated in the air for us. We can hear his cries of pain as we move through, and we're not really challenged. His projectiles scarcely have the speed to collide with the prince. But finally, with a final leap of faith and a flaring dagger, we are treated to a panoramic slow-mo finish where we finally end the vizier.
This is not what the dagger promised!
What is it?
is yours is rightfully mine, and mine it will be.
But as we see, it's not over. I'm assuming this is the prince's imagination, the Dark Prince manifesting and being corporeal. But regardless, the effect is the prince's dark ego is launching one final attack, a final flare and spasm of insidious resolve to claim your body, and now you're in his domain. I really like this finale, I do. The visuals are fun. You start by striking him as the sun darkens with each blow, and then you begin a battle of wills. His rage versus your contentment, his anxiety versus your calm. There isn't much to say since the game is over here. You can't die, there's no way to cheat or interact differently. You just follow the obstacles in this purgatory as a conversation rolls on. And it's great dialogue. The Dark Prince puts his silver tongue to use, taunting you for wasting the gift of time incarnate, raging that his violent tendencies got you here, and finally, taunting that you two aren't clearly distinguished. His evils are yours, your virtues his, and as we roll through a stunning kaleidoscope of the series' best environments, it's nothing short of a victory lap for what the franchise has achieved. But you can't escape, not until Farah extends her hand and pulls you out. And for once, the prince doesn't rage back. He doesn't try to turn back time or even whine away and rationalize his situation, his ultimate trump card. No, it's only by releasing that enmity, accepting the world and himself as they are. It's only by letting go that he finally frees himself. And that is the perfect conclusion we needed for our prince.
No! What are you doing?
And Two Thrones comes to a close, wrapping around to where it all began. The prince regaling Farah with his story, their story, with his iconic, slick introduction.
How did you really know my name?
Most people think time is like a river that flows swift and sure in one direction. But I have seen the face of time, and I can tell you, they are wrong. Time is an ocean in a storm. You may wonder who I really am, and why I say this. Come, and I will tell you a tale like none you have ever heard.
Because the prince has freed himself of the Dahaka. He's slain the vizier and saved Babylon. He's got the girl. And finally, he's relinquished that darkness within. And a prince no more. He's ready to become king. There's no story left to tell. And that suits me just fine. It's hard to pin where Two Thrones falls in the series for me. I enjoy the stealth mechanics, boss fights, and playful callbacks to the previous titles. The story and environment aren't executed brilliantly, and the Hollywood commercialized feel leave a bad taste in my mouth. Where the first game made great use of cliches and the second was a violent overhaul that stands well on its own, Two Thrones tries so much to blend these games that what we're left with feels very undercooked. It simply needed more time in the oven. The story threads aren't what I was hoping for. The loose narrative of the prince returning home after a long journey, facing an old enemy from his past now in his backyard, but ultimately slaying the vizier is overall a little banal. Definitely, you can run most of the surface level plot beats on these concepts alone. The prince with his single-minded goal, losing his path as the protector of the people, misled by a demon of the mind, now on the brink of losing himself entirely to revenge, is pulled back at the last moment because of his loyalty and affection for Farah. Mwah! What a beautiful story. But again, that's all very surface, purely descriptive. We see it play out scene by scene. That alone doesn't leave us much to discuss. That would be like saying Annihilation is about a girl investigating an alien threat. Parasite is about a poor family infiltrating a rich family. Like, yeah, those movies are about these things, but that's not what makes the storytelling phenomenal. Two Thrones would have benefited immensely from some underhanded storytelling. Again, the Dark Prince does scratch at this, because he calls out our hero for always seeking out finicky, universe-altering solutions for his problem. And that's good, because it's true. But I think we needed more. And it's funny because the game almost accidentally gets there. And when I was playing through, I was wondering if I was misremembering, because it seemed like it was setting up so much groundwork for this very simple but also very powerful question. How should someone react when after a journey, long absence, you are confronted with change? Your home, your relationships, and you yourself. Everything is different, but despite everything, it is still you. Babylon, the prince's idyllic home from his youth, is now war-torn and in ruins. It's violent and cruel and filled with his people's screams, but still it is his home that he fondly remembers. That Farah, a woman he loves and knows so intimately, who he wanted to marry years ago, no longer knows who he is. She's had a completely different life now. She's hardened and more assured, but it is still Farah. And the prince himself is losing control of his mind, flirting ever more with violence and cruelty, losing his grip on what matters as the Dark Prince twists him further. Yet ultimately, it's still him. Entire timelines have changed, and so much of what we see is the same, yet unfamiliar to our hero. By the end of the story, it would have been awesome just to see some commentary on this, even if it was just a measure of doubt in the prince if he can still be a good king, if Farah is still the same woman he knew, or a lingering fear if he can ever feel safe again in his own mind. And this didn't need to take away from the feel-good ending. The fact we end on the prince repeating his opening dialogue from Sands of Time, implying that he's about to tell Farah everything about his journey, of their erased journey, is kind of beautiful. It shows him persevering through that doubt and still committing to a bright future. What I'm saying in a roundabout way is that, yes, Two Thrones sometimes feels like a Hollywood cash grab. It aimed for hot action set pieces, superhero one-liners, and safe character arcs. But after all my investment and love for this trilogy, I just wanted more metaphors to engage with, more subtext to dig into. And it seems like there was a wasted opportunity here. On the same note, setting the story in Babylon had me so excited from the start. A conflict that's personal to our hero. But again, I don't think the writers squeezed enough juice out of this. Babylon, the jewel of ancient Mesopotamia, was the largest city in the world at multiple points, even thought to be the first city to have a population larger than 200,000. It was the first massive metropolis, but with the passing of centuries, there's still many unanswered questions about it today, and this ambiguity is great because the designers can have so much fun with the setting. In the distance, we'll frequently see this massive tower here, where our fight against the Vizier concludes, and it seems to be an allusion to the Tower of Babel. Now, the Tower of Babel is a creationist myth from the book of Genesis, a parable explaining why the people of the world speak different languages, and it's not even confirmed if it was real, yet here it is, in all its glory. In the opening cinematic, we see glimpses of a lighthouse, another allusion to the Lighthouse of Alexandria, an immense effort of Egyptian engineering, nothing to do with the Persian people. Of course, Prince of Persia doesn't aim for historic accuracy, but I think it's fun how in this universe, Babylon seems to be a world where histories morph and converge, where myths meet reality. But little was done to make this feel like the prince's home. Every environment should have meant something to him, and the fact that this is his home should have done more to push the story, that he knows it and his people. These should have been crucial to the outcome of beating the Vizier and his dark self. Sadly, this same story could have been told in downtown London and it would have had the same effect. Two Thrones is not a fondly remembered title, and I see why. It's riddled with the scars of missed potential and stifled creativity that comes with a safe franchise game. But I did enjoy the refined gameplay, the new quirks they threw in, and the nostalgic, charming story, even if it wasn't the final big bang I hoped the series would close out on. Overall, I think it's fair to say that Two Thrones is a mixed bag, and the Sands of Time trilogy is neither stronger nor weaker for its existence. Once again, I have spent way too long looking at a game that is far too old, and I did it because it was fun. And definitely a contributing factor is all the cool, supportive comments I've received in my other videos, so thank you for engaging with my work like that. The Prince of Persia trilogy is a flawed, beautiful thing. It has such high moments, interesting forays into experimentation, and fundamentally a likable hero who does cool shit on the screen. As we can see, Two Thrones is maybe the weakest addition to the series. It just really depends on how much you loved or hated Warrior Within. But it still ends the story in the right way. our hero, the prince, is happy. He got the girl, and he's soon to leave the mantle of prince behind, and that's all we ever wanted for him. Maybe in a year or so, I'll make a short review of the trilogy holistically. And I promise I do mean short. But for now, I do think I'm finished with looking at Prince of Persia. I know we see more of the prince in The Forgotten Sands, and I might even critique that one day, but right now, I'm just a little bit burnt out on time travel and sand monsters. I'm also aware of a 2008 game that's completely disconnected from our prince and his stories that looks interesting. I've read polarizing reviews about it, and if you know me, that just makes the project look even more tantalizing. But no. For now, I think that's enough Prince of Persia. If I can review a few different narratives between now and then, I think that would definitely make me happy. Well, that's where I'd really love some feedback. I'm tempted to look at some more modern games. For example, I hear the Star Wars Fallen Order is a great single-player linear game that might be fun to look at. And similarly, Dying Light 2 is meant to release later this year, another great first-person action horror game with a pretty good story. I'm also tempted to revisit some games a little bit older that I never got around to playing, games like Ico or The Last Guardian. Maybe I'll even return to Shadow of the Colossus, probably one of my favourite subtle storytelling of all time. So please, if you have any suggestions, please consider letting me know below. If you enjoyed this video and like long-form content in general, do consider subscribing. And if nothing else, I'd like to thank you for choosing to spend your time watching something I created. It really does mean a lot to me. So with that said, thanks for watching.